succeed on a dashboard project. We're going to first start off with talking about really what is a dashboard. We'll move on to some case studies. Then we're going to talk about some of the keys to the success of the dashboard project. So we're going to start off with Abdul talking about what is a dashboard and what is not.
Hi everyone, this is Abdul speaking. Thank you very much, Dave, for the introduction. So just as an agenda, first we'll talk a little bit about the definitions and that are commonly talked about whenever we meet with a client and whenever we talk to the industry about this, and that's the first thing, is defining things. We'll walk you through a couple of quick case studies, a couple of very different industries, very different geographies. And then, our takeaway, hopefully, from this presentation is really 5 keys that we've identified through our years of experience, as guiding principles in delivering and managing successful dashboard initiatives end to end. So, looking at the slide, I think it's important to start the conversation, with the word itself. So, what is a dashboard? Commonly, if you want to take it literally, if you even take the Stephen Few definition, one of the industry experts on it, it talks about the dashboard being a visual display of the most important information needed to achieve one or more objectives, consolidated and arranged on a single screen so the information can be monitored at a glance. And that's the key. People want, or executives to be very, very specific, want to be able, with a quick glance, less than 2 seconds, figure out what to look at next. What does happen, though, typically or traditionally, is that initially, where we see clients coming in, it usually is handed to an IT department who's used to a report or a number of standard tabular reports, and that's what they start out with. And the request comes in and says, we've got a bunch of reports, can you convert them into dashboards? So that's fine, so that gives you the detailed view. The other scenario we usually see is an analyst or an analytics department coming in saying, we need to slice and dice. We need to do some data discovery. Originally, the request comes in from the executive as asking for a dashboard. Our experience is that when someone, or whether it's a line of business or frankly even IT, when they're asking for a dashboard, what they're really asking for is all 3. They're asking for a holistic performance management framework. And unlike where the conversation typically starts, they don't really want to start with a report. They want to start with a dashboard and then have the dashboard tell them where to go next based on some indicators, some scorecards, etc. What we do differently is we take the conversation where it should have started from the beginning, which is the requirement gathering, even if we're starting with an existing report. So again, the webinar is really geared towards disrupting, looking at the common practices that are happening today in business intelligence and disrupting that a little bit and going back to where the conversation should really start, which is the end user.
Okay, great. So I'm going to just talk about 2 example case studies that really helped solidify some of these 5 keys. First off, let's talk about AstraZeneca here. AstraZeneca is a top pharmaceutical company that had a brand management issue. Before they launched a new product, they need a solid performance framework. Now, they were using paper reports, but as the brand manager told us, they need something with a bit more depth. They had outsourced their dashboard project to a third party, but what had happened was, what was delivered kind of suffered from low adoption rates. When they engaged with us, we scoped the project with emphasis on the sales staff, who would ultimately be the users of these dashboards. They flew the research team to our headquarters here in Toronto, Canada, where we combined the insight that they have into their internal metrics with the principles that I'll be telling you about today. After delivery, user adoption rose 200%. They were able to generate ad hoc reports instantly instead of waiting for the previous 1-week turnaround. And their departments were empowered with the ability to generate their own monthly reports rather than the process being outsourced. This success story can be compared actually to the Saudi telecom company, which is one of the largest providers in the region with over 160 million customers spanning across Africa and South Asia. The metrics in the telecom industry are often very time sensitive, so they found themselves reacting to problem situations rather than preventing them. This was particularly an issue in their call centers. When they engaged with us, we actually flew our consultants on site to their headquarters in Riyadh to implement the required dashboards. Using the principles that we'll be discussing today, the dashboards we delivered actually reduced their service ticket counts by 55%. So here's a picture of it in action in the call center there, and yeah, so ticket counts in terms of trouble tickets were reduced by 55%, and really they now have access to the metrics that they need to see. So why don't we first start off by talking about the very first key here in how to succeed on a dashboard project. And the very first one is redefining success in terms of a dashboard specifically. So the very first item here I want to talk about is efficiency. And I think this is probably the most salient or obvious success factor, is the fact that oftentimes what we encounter is a situation where you have a senior manager who's making a request to an analyst for a monthly or just a one-off report. And really what happens for the analyst, what they need to do then is actually tap into some internal databases. Maybe they are actually separate data sources, whether it's finance or operations or some other databases. And sometimes they actually, we need to tap into some external sources. So maybe their marketing sources are kind of outsourced. They need to tap into some web services, for example. So what happens here is that this report actually gets used with some senior management decisions, maybe used in some management committees. And the problem that we find also is that you have very many different data sources which can result in different formats, right? So maybe you have some Excel spreadsheets coming from the finance as a sort of an export. Maybe you have the reporting services report coming from operations, and maybe the marketing data is coming from maybe a web feed, or maybe they just provide a CSV. And so what the analyst has to do now is put all that together into maybe an Excel spreadsheet that they would present to management. And you can see how this can be very time-consuming. Obviously, it will take the analyst some time to put all this together. So now your senior VP needs to wait in order to get the data that they need to see. At the same time, your analyst is also consumed with working on creating this report, when instead they could be generating some insight into your actual business performance. So obviously what makes more sense is to set it up so that the data is actually automatically being fed into some kind of automated setup where the management can actually tap into those databases through a dashboard automatically. Right? So whenever they need to see their dashboard, or whenever they need to see their metrics, they just open up the browser, they go to maybe an internal portal, or maybe they, during their meeting they can open it up and have a look at it all at once. And all this process is now kind of on demand, right? So they would see the most recent data points. They don't need to actually send a request to an analyst. And also at the same time, your analyst is now freed up so that, again, they can spend their time doing more valuable things for the organization. So that's really what we mean by efficiency, is that you actually have something that is going to deliver value in terms of resource allocation. The next one, sorry, before I move on, and this is really something that was very salient with SDC, where the executives actually would have to make those requests to their teams, and by that time that it would actually come around, it would often be too late. So the next item here is function, and oftentimes what we come across when we look at the existing reports or the way that clients usually visualize their data in their current status is something similar to this, where they stick with sort of the default palettes, and they sort of choose visualizations kind of on a whim, and it can end up being not as easy to tell what needs attention, and the story itself that the data is trying to tell can often get obscured. And so simple changes in how we would visualize data into a way that is much easier to consume is very important. And this is what we mean by function, in that the way that things are laid out on the dashboard itself is specifically designed to be intuitive to the end user and to actually let the data tell its own story. And I think what really embodies this idea of having a functional visualization is a bullet graph. Now, some of you may have heard of this, some of you may have not. The idea is that it's essentially a linear gauge with some statuses kind of colored in the background and some context added. And this is really something that a few people really emphasize in the design of their dashboard. And in terms of the principles and the philosophies behind the way that you would visualize data in this sense, I mean, this is how you can end up with a dashboard that looks something like this. And this is very utilitarian, I would say. Right? So the way that this data has been laid out really emphasizes understanding a large sum of data in a very compact screen, very small real estate. So the very first section I want to talk about here are these spark lines. Right? So the idea is that you have a line chart with a highlighted region in the background to indicate maybe some nominal values. And the idea is that you can see sort of a trend really quick. You don't see the actual numbers themselves because they're not as important as the trend itself. We have some state indicators here that have been used in conjunction with the rest of the color palette chosen here, so that the dashboard actually emphasizes the areas that need attention. Right? So when you open up a dashboard, you immediately know what needs as some action or what needs further investigation. Over here we have some box plots that would summarize entire distributions of data. And again, this is the idea of having a lot of data underlying a dashboard and being able to summarize it in a very compact manner that still gives you valuable information into your business metrics. And so I can probably imagine that the way that this dashboard has been laid out isn't necessarily for everybody. Right? It's very functional. It's very targeted towards, again, that whole getting immediate feedback from the dashboard, getting immediate understanding as to where your attention is needed. But obviously the design itself is something that some individuals might not necessarily appreciate. And this really leads me into the third item here, which is emotion. I mean, if you think about that dashboard as being analogous to a vehicle, I think that a Volvo is very appropriate here. I mean, a Volvo is something that's very safe. It will last you a long time, and it's actually very easy to maintain, especially the 740 here. But I mean, a Volvo isn't for everybody, but it does have its fans, right? We do have people who drive the same Volvo. It's very, it's boxy, but they drive it for 1 million miles, and this is something that people can't really claim, to do in very many vehicles. This is something that's very unique to Volvo. And in the same sense, if we become very utilitarian, very minimalist, very functional with the design of our dashboard, that's really the kind of perspective and philosophy that we're getting with our dashboards. I'll show you an actual live one here. We can see how, as I interact with it, I do get more insights. But again, the design is in such a way that it is fairly minimalistic, right? But I am able to interact with this, highlight the data points that I need, and change the date range, for example, and get the data that I want to see. Moving on here, that we have a different kind of layout where this is maybe one that's actually more in line with the color palette and theme and feel that a general kind of marketing or a company would want to see on their dashboards, right? So this is more in line with sort of this green bean theme that we want to see for this this grocer. But at the same time, we still have that ability to highlight what needs attention, right? So we have some areas here that do need some attention because it is below thresholds, and so it still is possible to have functionality without necessarily compromising emotions. Similarly, if we go a little bit further in the spectrum, we can see how we can have something that is kind of very cool looking, I would say, where the design is in such a way that maybe this is something that you want to have in sort of a business-to-business conversation, where you do want to project a particular image about your company, about the ability for you to design an interface that is friendly for your end users, while simultaneously still being functional and being able to deliver insight into the business metrics that are relevant. And so this is what I'm talking about when I say emotion. Is that it can either be very minimalistic and functional, or it can be something that is in line with sort of the branding of a company, or it can just be something that conveys a very particular design philosophy about the dashboard. But really, at the end of the day, we don't have to compromise function in order to obtain the emotional buy-in. And this is something that often gets forgotten when it comes to dashboard design, is that at the end of the day, people are human, and not everybody drives a Volvo. People purchase cars for very emotional reasons, and in the same vein, people would have very strong preferences for dashboards designed in an emotional manner. So if we can add sort of a bit of, I guess, class and style to a dashboard without compromising function, that is something that we should definitely keep in mind when it comes to succeeding in the way that a dashboard is delivered. So again, not necessarily a Volvo, but maybe something like an A6, right? So again, thinking about not compromising function, the A6 actually is something that won the IHS Top Pick Safety Award for its class. So we aren't compromising necessarily the safety and, again, the function of the dashboard by changing its design. We are keeping in mind, of course, the users who, again, are going to be quite the topic of our conversation today. So really, when we're talking about a successful dashboard, we need to keep these kind of three elements in mind here, right? So we need to keep in mind the fact that, well, yes, we are actually improving upon the speed at which we're getting the data to our metrics. We are improving on the actual value that we're delivering to the end user, right? We are actually improving on their ability to do their job. And of course, at the end of the day, if you are using a tool regularly, you do want to have something that's emotional you can connect with. And so these three are sort of the items that we feel are key to a successful dashboard. Talking about the second key here, kind of rethinking recurrence gathering. And oftentimes what happens is that the way that a dashboard project proceeds is people look at sort of the data that they have currently, and then they'll kind of build it up from there to say that we currently have these tables in our database, therefore we should build these metrics based off of that. And what we do, as Abdul pointed out, is we try to be a bit more disruptive, try to turn it on its head. We emphasize it from the top down, right? So we look at the end user, as I mentioned, in talking about emotion, and we kind of bring it down from there, looking at what the user actually needs, what are their priorities. And so oftentimes we start off with an end user analysis, looking at again, really what are the decisions that they are going to make on the dashboard. If they look at a chart and it's looking a certain way, what is going to be most intuitive to them? What is going to be something that is designed in such a way that they can click on it and it would do exactly what they would think it would do in order to get at more information that they need. Right? So really, what are the decisions that they need to make? Consequently, what are the actions that they're going to take as a result of seeing some of these metrics? Right? So if they are actually looking at something that is sort of has that red indicator, it's above or below threshold, are they going to pick up a phone and call the individual who is responsible for that particular metric? And so we need to keep that in mind, that at the end of the day, a dashboard is a decision support system. Right? So ultimately, those decisions are going to lead to some actions that they're going to make for their company. And lastly, of course, again, as a tie-in to the emotional side of things, what are their tastes like? There are those who would work well with sort of, again, a very minimalistic approach. They maybe like to see more numbers than others. But at the same time, there are those who do like to see things that are a bit more, I guess, well-dressed, things with a bit more curb appeal. So that is very important when looking at your end user. Naturally, when we're looking at defining our metrics, it's very important to consider the fact that oftentimes we come across quite a large laundry list of metrics from our clients. They kind of go through, again, the various tables that they have and say, oh, we can measure this and this and this and this and this. Right? But really, at the end of the day, you need to ask yourselves, are those nice to haves, or are they actually needed in order to, again, make those decisions or make those actions relevant to their business? Right? Oftentimes, we need to keep in mind that the dashboard itself obviously has limited real estate. Right? So the initial view needs to be of your key indicators. So from there, maybe you can drill down and see some more of the detailed nice-to-haves. But really, when you prioritize your metrics, that really helps you have a very clear definition of what is important. At the same time, you want to ask, what are the relevant context that we can add to, actually deliver some value with these metrics. I mean, simply knowing that you made 30 million in the last quarter is not enough, right? If your target was 40 million, then that was a failure. If your target was 20 million, then that was a great success. So it's very important to factor in a context such as benchmarks, targets, budgets, service level agreements, anything that would give you an idea as to how you're actually performing. So when we are defining metrics, this is very important that we focus in on being a bit more critical about the actual value that the metric is delivering, because this, again, ties into the whole functional side of things when we're talking about a dashboard, right, and how it will be successful. So with AstraZeneca, this is the first two items that I talked about here, talking about user analysis and metrics definitions. This is really what helped us succeed with this particular engagement, right? The fact that we really focused in on who are the actual end users and what is it that they actually need to do with these metrics. What do they need to see? And then lastly, of course, talking to them about what are the actual metrics themselves, focusing on, again, only the key ones that they need to see on the actual dashboards themselves. Now, once you have the end user, again, very well defined, you have sort of the emotional side of things well defined, knowing what it is that they want to do, what is it that they need to make a decision about, and you also have the metrics well defined, so you know what it is that we're going to be measuring. So you have the kind of functional side of things, what you are actually needing in terms of data. Obviously, now you need to think about data, right? So when we're looking at certain systems, sometimes we do have data sources that are quite disparate. And so, you want to ask yourselves, is it economical to bring them all together, perhaps, into a data warehouse or a data mart where the data is simply drawn from there instead? Sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes it makes more sense just to simply draw from the original sources themselves. But it is a question that ultimately would tie into efficiency because if you do need data to be maybe a bit more live, maybe you do want to tap directly into those data sources. However, if it is something that you look at on a daily basis, maybe you have daily aggregates, it makes more sense maybe to have that kind of intermediate stage where you aren't affecting maybe these production systems. You're looking at a reporting database instead. So this really does tie into sort of the efficiency side of things when we're looking at the dashboard success factors. And lastly, of course, there is everything else. I mean, there isn't just the end users, the metrics, and the data. There are other factors such as looking at security. If you do need to have maybe something like a single sign-on, various other elements like integration, maybe with an existing portal that you have or an existing intranet. And of course, user training, perhaps, if you do need to look at sort of a plan for training sort of backup individuals for the system if ever anybody does leave the organization or simply is not available. So I think Abdul now is going to talk about the next two keys.
Appreciate it, Dave. So this one is a bit tricky to coming into a project. So the idea of controlling the excitement. So it's always great when we're excited about an initiative, and I haven't talked to a single client yet who who's whether it's a direct executive or someone from IT or analytics, where there was an excitement about this BI initiative or dashboard initiative. What we try to talk about is really controlling the momentum, controlling the excitement, because everybody wants their dashboards yesterday, and everybody wants them just the way they envision them to be. Add to that the stakeholder management side. So if you if you're looking at just as an example, a sales and marketing dashboard integrated together, there are potential inherent conflicts between the key performance indicators, the metrics, etc. So it's all about examining what we're doing as opposed to just doing what we're told to do. Are we really designing something in a set-up-to-fail scenario where the first project actually succeeds and then it really never takes off as a whole initiative and we're never regarded as a center of excellence, if you will, as a business unit? Or are we looking at the stakeholder management side? Are we looking at risk management and whether what we're doing actually is relevant from a long-term perspective? So to deal with that, again, going along the theme of really disrupting what's going on, as opposed to sitting down for 6 months and looking at your data mart and data warehouse, etc., what we found useful in terms of gaining not only user adoption but executive backing on the whole initiative is really to adopt a phased approach to things, and it's really coming from the risk management side of things. So, in a phase one, you're really talking about a couple of dashboards initially with the key metrics to the people who, frankly, matter most from a decision-making perspective, or the people who are easier to manage from a stakeholder point of view. So you're looking at, you're probably not going to disrupt too much of what they're doing with the reporting at this point. You're just presenting a new way of doing things with a couple of dashboards. It really adds a lot of value right away. The catch to this is obviously, from their perspective, is they're getting amazing-looking dashboards if you have the right resources behind it, but in a matter of weeks, as opposed to waiting for months and months until the data gets ready. Now, the other interesting thing with this approach, as Dave mentioned, is that you're no longer restricting the beginning of the project, which is really the critical path side, with a data mart that was designed without really examining the business side very carefully. And then in phase two, you start introducing more depth around the same business unit, or you start, frankly, people talk about this stuff right away after they start using it, so you start going broadly in the organization. You do need to stay in control if you're the initiative owner. In terms of what, the moment the word gets out, you have a good problem of everybody wanting that good dashboard. So now you're starting to add your imprint on not only the branding, but it's starting to look like a framework. And that's another phase usually, a little longer, sometimes a little shorter actually than phase one, depending on what exactly you're doing. And then in phase three is where you start adding, the accountability side. So think of, I think in the retail dashboard that you saw, there was this idea of annotations where people can talk to each other on the dashboard. So all of a sudden, what started as a chart is now turning into a communication framework for managing performance. You can talk about notifications for proactively managing, your business. Again, technology-wise, they may not be great additions, but what they, now it's the dashboard is starting to affect the culture of the organization, and we're still not at that, kind of spending 6 months on the data warehouse stage. And in phase three, sometimes, you'll do the data warehouse because certain things now will be demanded on transactional data. For example, now that I've got my data every 5 minutes, now I want it every minute. I want to see what's happening every second sometimes. Then you start talking about the data warehouse. But the difference now is, the data that is being requested as part of a data management project is really driven by the line of business leadership requirements, and you're not spending a whole lot of time doing everything under the sun, just to kind of appease the kind of the as much requirements as possible, if you will. I remember recently we basically wrapped up a BI roadmap for one business unit for one Fortune 500 company, where we literally started with that phase one. It was everybody was excited. It was a director level type of project. Literally, it took 3 weeks, and we were online. Now, obviously, we were online with Excel sheets, frankly, as the data source. It didn't really matter to us or the client because the dashboard looked amazing all the same, and it was fairly functional, and it made them realize quite a bit of efficiency. Phase two was kind of similar to that, but by phase three, it was 2 business units that were related to each other, talking to each other. And we did an enterprise level kind of SSIS data warehouse for them and added more dashboards along the way. Now, of course, once you're at that stage, now you have some clarification and validation on the whole initiative. Your business unit becomes a center of excellence. You're looked at as, really a leader internally on how to do business intelligence properly and, quite frankly, cost effectively. Because at the end of the day, it's about, combining the quick wins that can show results right away, along with fitting into a long-term strategy that would accommodate continuous improvement through user feedback. Now, the fourth key, in this kind of puzzle, if you will, is managing the delivery very proactively. What we quite often see is, again, because of the excitement, because everybody thinks it's just a chart, initially at least, quite often we see delays in delivery internally. Even if people are trained on the software itself. We also see resource misalignments quite frequently as well, even with our own clients that we train sometimes because of the lack of resourcing they have. So what we have done, obviously, is just like any good IT software company, we've got a certain workflow that we work with, the key to this is obviously, there's a couple of key points. Obviously, there's nothing really spectacular about this, but there are a couple of key points here. One is locking down the key performance indicators at the very beginning. So, any further changes to the key performance indicators would, would make us re-examine the scope and the deadlines that we committed to internally here. And that's very key to making sure that, you have a sense of accountability as you deliver the project. The data readiness now starts becoming important. Do we have, or are we going to have the data ready, the subset that we need for this project ready at the appropriate, phase in the project? And then you get your critical path point, which is really developing the storyboard with a styling round. So this is really where most projects, from a delivery standpoint, assuming that you've done everything right before that in terms of requirement gathering and stakeholder management, this is really where most projects succeed or fail. Are we developing the right storyboard? To do that, you've got to have the right skill set from a data visualization best practice point of view. People who, not only understand the business, but they've got that niche skill set of understanding how to convert the business story into a visual story that's also not only meaningful, but somewhat visually appealing, or could use a bit of styling, but it's fairly visually appealing. What governs this project is mandatory client reviews. So, how many client or how many internal, even if you're working with your internal customer, how many internal client reviews are you going to allow in this delivery? And how are you setting up your schedule accordingly? If you've got the storyboard right, and if you've got it approved, it's usually coming with minimal interaction, but and a sample of the data. But if you've got it right, the rest should be fairly smooth in terms of implementing the dashboard, whatever tool you're using, frankly, and then styling it. You deploy on the on a server or whichever machine or environment you're working on, and then you go through a period of user acceptance testing, whether that's 7 days or 30 days, depends on your environment, and then you close. If you want to go negative with this thing in the sense of what would happen if we don't manage proactively, what you're really doing is if you don't follow a certain process, maybe not this, but this is what we find works for us. At user acceptance testing, what you'll find is that people are asking for things that were out of scope, and that's what that's what happens when you don't have the right conversations with stakeholders upfront in the project before the delivery starts, or they didn't have enough time to vet out the storyboard that you presented, or we talked about not starting with the data, but we actually started with the data. We didn't start with the end users, for example. So a lot of what's happening in today's world in terms of BI projects falling behind, BI projects too focused on data, not enough focus on end users and what they actually want, a lot of it can be actually explained and attributed to the philosophy and behind, that goes behind the way we actually deliver work. Now, in terms of the delivery team, this is our recommendation based on years of experience. You do need someone to own the project from a project management perspective. You do need a principal consultant, someone who would actually deliver the work, the profile of the person, probably someone with a business analyst background who has been trained in a little bit of technology, but quite a bit of data visualization best practices. And with a little bit of experience in terms of what the BI atmosphere looks like. You do need quite a bit of quality assurance, obviously. That's usually a developer or someone who's a kind of a peer. Before you actually present it to the end users for user acceptance testing. But then there's a unique resource around graphics design and user interface design, and that person's job is really to add that emotional factor or that wow factor, whether it's backgrounds, branding, animations, etc. Now note that we do separate those two resources in the sense of we do not expect the consultant or the developer or the BA to be familiar with graphics design necessarily, because that's more of an artistic skill set. So if we're trying to target the value orientation, as a team, when we deliver dashboards, we talked about efficiency and we talked about function. Okay, well, the consultants can take care of that. But not a lot of consultants can take care of graphics design the way it should be taken care of. So we do have a specialist role around that whenever we deliver a dashboard project, which really adds to the flair depending on what value orientation we want to target with that specific project.
Great. And after the project has been delivered, it's very important to still keep this in mind with evaluating user feedback. So after, during the initial launch and immediately after, for about 1 to 2 months, you're going to have kind of very high levels of excitement from the end users, largely because, well, it's something new. It's something very visual. Again, let's talk about emotions. It's during this time actually that user feedback is very valuable. Right? So this is where they have not yet gotten used to this new interface, and so maybe they'll be able to see areas that aren't necessarily as intuitive as maybe you thought it might have been. Right? So this is where it's very important to have regular checks with the end users on whether or not it actually is meeting your initial goals of delivering some kind of difference to their day. Again, being able to be accommodating and flexible to make small changes to the dashboard as needed. If this truly is a success, you do want to see the fact that after about 2 months or so, they are still using it, and it is still making a difference in their day. And as a result, you would find that obviously users would automatically talk about how this has made a difference in their operations. Now, keep in mind, of course, that your first dashboard is really never going to be perfect, no matter how much background research you do, how much involvement you have them on the project. It's important to realize that the key is to be flexible and responsive to user feedback. Especially even going forward, the business and environmental factors will change. Your business as it works today is not the same as how it did business 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And so your dashboard must be as flexible and responsive to the environment and other environmental factors as the rest of your organization. So very important to keep this in mind. Not only is it throughout the discovery and design and development and implementation process, but also during the implementation and actually after launch. After launch is also important as well. So what we talked about today were these 5 keys in terms of how to succeed on a dashboard project. You do want to redefine success in terms of your dashboard itself, talking about efficiency, talking about functionality and making an actual difference in their day, and talking about emotion, something that they can actually want to use. We also talked about rethinking requirements gathering processes, talking about, again, putting the user first as opposed to data, and talking about being more critical about the actual metrics themselves. Did they actually deliver value to the end user? And then talking about the actual data readiness, whether or not it makes sense for you to use the current data architecture as is, or if you do need to make some changes. And of course, there's everything else there with security. Next, you do want to control excitement with the dashboard project. So if you do need to phase things out, you do want to make sure that you're not biting off more than you can chew. Right? So there's no such thing as one dashboard for every single department, unless it's a very generic one. You do want to phase things out so that initially you target what is actually needed at the moment. Right? So once you have that done, then you start to move on to other areas and you start improving on your capabilities there. Next, you do want to manage your dashboard initiative proactively. So you do want to make sure that, again, users are involved in this process. You want to make sure that any kind of changes are addressed early on so that they don't disrupt the actual project flow. Lastly, again, after you have implemented, you want to ensure that you incorporate user feedback immediately and as well moving forward. So thank you very much for your attention today. Again, my name is David, and with me